Thanks for listening to the Media People Podcast, lively and insightful chats with the people who power the media industry. I'm your host, Victor Genova. For more episodes, you can go to soundcloud.com/mediapeoplepodcast, or you can subscribe on your favorite podcast service like Apple Podcasts or CastBox. Views expressed by participants are personal. Many people have made the jump from media sales to agency life, but few have left the world of media sales to start their own agency. But that's exactly what Zoltan Toth, Managing Director of Mellor Croy, has done. A lifelong music aficionado, Zoltan's first media gig was at the campus radio station in university, overseeing the jazz time slot. After graduation, he parlayed that passion into a full-time career, holding positions at Denon Music, Koch Entertainment, and Entertainment One. He pivoted to media sales at Famous Players, looking after the emerging world of in-movie theater advertising. Famous Players was eventually bought by Cineplex Entertainment, and after 9 years with the company, he made his first entrepreneurial foray into agency life with Octopus Media. Zoltan's latest venture is Mellor Croy, a boutique agency providing senior-level media buying and planning expertise to a variety of clients.
Mellor Croy is a media agency. We're like every other media agency. We buy, we plan, we do strategy. We're just a lot smaller. We're very boutique. My role is really the business development end of it. And right now, I've been doing a lot of overseeing of the planning for clients. I don't get involved with the day-to-day nitty-gritty. However, I will get my team to, sort of do the back-end work and essentially just make sure that the clients are getting what they had asked for and really just seeing it through, seeing the service through.
Let's go back to the beginning. Where are you from?
Oh, I'm from Toronto. I'm a Toronto boy. Born and raised. The only time I wasn't here was when I went to Western, when I went to university in London.
So you spent your entire life here with that exception?
That's right, yep.
So you've seen the neighborhood change?
I have, yeah. You know, it's. I remember Queen Street. I'm not going to date myself here, but I remember Queen Street when it was literally 3 blocks or 2 if we were lucky back then. And it was just a bunch of thrift shops and vintage shops. And of course the Horseshoe was always there, but you see what a world stage city Toronto is with all the development. And you see it push out to the east and west ends, of course, the suburbs. The suburbs are now becoming part of this greater downtown. It was a big city back then, and it's a huge city now. So,
did you have any interests or hobbies growing up?
I was always into sports. That was always my big thing.
You're a big hockey player, aren't you?
I wouldn't say I'm a big hockey player, but I've played it since I was 5. That whole career basically ended me up in beer league. So, I mean, we have goals, right? But the cool thing is I actually play with my sons now in beer league while they're sort of transitioning out of minor league hockey. So it's a lot of fun when you get to play with your kids.
Speaking of kids, you cite your parents as being your biggest influence. Why?
They were immigrants from Europe, specifically Hungary, and they came during a time when there was turmoil and war in the '56 revolution. So my dad came in he came in '56 to Toronto, and then he went back like every other immigrant at the time. They would come here, establish themselves, not necessarily get citizenship, but they would buy some property, line some work up, save some money, and go back and get married. That was the way you did it. And that's what they did. So when they came back together as a married couple, they raised a family and they started their own businesses.
So they were entrepreneurial then?
Yes.
What did they do? Like, what businesses did they own?
So my dad had a landscape construction company, and he started that in the mid-'60s, and he had it right up until he retired. He did everything from interlocking he had a whole team, and I actually worked for him in the summers. And then my mom was a daycare owner, so she had a bunch of daycares that she ran for about 35, 40 years. So yeah, it was really interesting to see them go through what I'm going through now, which is to run a business, not just a media agency, but you've got to deal with every aspect of the business when you own it. So back then I didn't truly appreciate what they were going through, and now I really do because I have to live it and breathe it like they did.
But apart from your parents, you also cite your sister as having a pretty big impact on your life because you're a big music fan, and wasn't she the one that pointed you towards it or helped you discover that passion?
She did, yeah. So she came home with all kinds of crazy vinyl, and I didn't know what it was. I was a kid. I was like 11, 12, 13, something like that. And yeah, she introduced me to punk rock, which, you know, back in the early 80s.
Like Sex Pistols we're talking about? Like Sid Vicious?
Like England and then LA and New York and all the punk movements that were happening across the world. It was pretty exciting. It was kind of like somebody said it years ago about listening to The Damned, this band called The Damned from England. Listening to The Damned was kind of like going into a room and hearing glass break for 4 minutes. And that's, you know, it was just like chaos, but it was controlled chaos, and it turned into a huge movement. So she was a huge influence, and we're still very close today. And yeah, so she was a huge influence.
About punk rock music, was it just the music in general, or was like the rebellious nature of the lyrics and what it stood for that really pulled you in? Yeah,
because a lot of people talk about how it was that it's like an attitude and it's a movement and it's more than just the music. But for me, it was really just the music. It was so outrageously different, and it was so raw and out there. Like it just, you know. And then what it spawned was so many different movements within it, even today. So I was never really like a political, like anarchist or anything like that. That's just not who I am or ever was. But I just liked the sound. I liked the music, and it was so simple and kind of powerful. The only non-family member you cite as an influence is Neil Young. Why him? Well, I have a couple, actually. So Neil Young was, you know, not just because he's Canadian. I mean, that helps. But he's always been innovative. And in the media world, it's always about what's new and what's different. Mm-hmm. We know, and as you know, Vic, you know, on the sales side, it's always, how many times do you hear from a client that says, Vic, I want to do this that's never been done before? Like, how many times does that happen in a week? Out of the box, media first, you know what it is. Yeah, I hear that all the time. Yeah, so when I sort of strip all that bigger theme down and think of him, he, you know, from all the different bands he was in before he went on his own, and then when he was on his own, all the different things that he did folk records, he did country records, he did like a weird 80s, almost like a synthesized record. Like he went all over the place. He did a rockabilly record, he did a punk record, he did, like, you name it. He's done it all. So all that to say, he's just tried everything. He's never been afraid to discover within himself what was possible. So I just always thought of him when you make the leap from working for a company for so long to going out on your own. You know, there's days where you're like, I can't think of anything that's really new and exciting. But then there's other days where you've got 20 ideas. So it's just constantly reminding myself of what he's done and how he continues to do it. And he's almost 80, right? So pretty impressive. Your very first job, I think we already touched on it, was working for your dad's landscaping company. What's it like having your dad as your boss for your very first job? That's a good question, because he's your dad and you have to work for him. I think it's an adjustment, because like any employer, if they ask you to do something, you're employed by them, you have to do it. That's just the way it works. So that took some time. You know, I was young too, but I learned pretty quickly that, you know, he was in charge and I had to do what he said. So years of backbreaking work is what entailed after that. But no, it was all positive. There was definitely an adjustment when you're working with family, you know. During this time, though, you packed your bags and you moved to London, Ontario to go to the University of Western Ontario. You already touched on that was the only time moving away from Toronto. London is significantly smaller than Toronto, but I wouldn't say it's a small town. Was there a bit of culture shock when you landed there? A little bit, actually, because the downtown core is about 10 blocks. And, of course, Toronto's blocks are just endless. It just keeps going. Yeah, it's not quite like New York, but it's you know, considerably bigger. I think with London, though, you learn very quickly, like most university towns in Ontario, that the university is the city. Yeah. And so that was quite evident. But I had a great time there, and it's a great school. What did you study at university? I did a sort of combined poli-sci economics degree. I wanted to go to business, but I just kept pursuing what I was studying, and it was going fine at the time. And I got my degree. And one thing that that I did at the same time as I was a volunteer at the radio station. And that was a big part of how I landed my first job post university. So I was a volunteer at CHRW 94.7 on your FM dial.
Is that your radio voice? Did you just click in there for a second?
I think so. Busted. And that was an awesome experience. I wanted to, this is going back in the early 90s. So in the era of like grunge and alternative music. And I wanted one of those cool time slots. I really did. But of course they were all taken, and I was a newbie volunteer. And so after filing hundreds and thousands of records in the library and organizing and realizing that this was not great, there was an opportunity to do a show from 1 to 3. And it was afternoon jazz. The most interesting thing about it is I knew absolutely nothing about jazz. Like not even Louis Armstrong, if you can believe that. I didn't know anything.
No Miles Davis, nothing?
Nothing. Like I had no idea. But of course the program manager at the time said, "Hey, do you want to do this? Do you know anything about jazz?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can figure it out. Yeah, I'm confident." He goes, "Are you confident you can do a jazz show?" I said, "Of course I can. Yeah."
Fake it till you make it.
So I got a book, this like encyclopedia of basically the A to Z in jazz. And I just read through it. However, I needed to do a show and I didn't have any material. I had nothing prepped. So I asked the guys that were doing that cool alternative show before me, because they saw I was sweating and I was going on in about 15 minutes. And they said, hey buddy, what's going on? Are you okay? And I said, actually, no, I'm not okay. I have to do a jazz show and I don't know what I'm doing. And they said, oh, easy. Just play like live stuff, because the songs are like 23 minutes long. So they'll give you enough time to figure out what we're going to do next.
That's true. Jazz songs can go on forever.
So I played all this weird German fusion jazz, which was like 18 to 20 minutes long. And it worked for the first few episodes. It worked really well. But of course, when you're doing a show in Canada, you have to do Canadian content.
That's true.
So trying to find Canadian jazz was interesting. But you know what? I just went for it. Again, going back to Neil Young, it's like, just try it, see, like, don't be afraid to do it. And I was a little bit nervous trying to figure it out, but I figured it out. And then I eventually got the show that I wanted, but it wasn't until my fourth year when I was graduating. And it was only because the guys that weren't doing it just they stopped showing up. So, so by default, I got probably about 10 shows, but it was a lot of fun. It was great experience. And I got to see how a recording studio worked. I got to work on some commercials. So I was considering going to Ryerson for a radio and television program afterwards, but I started working. So, that's where things went then.
Okay, you alluded to it earlier, though, that this was kind of the gateway to your first job in media and out of university. Where did you land and what were you doing?
Well, not media, actually my first job.
Yeah. So
in the corporate working world was working for a music distributor. So for a record company.
We can call it media, I guess.
We'll call it media. Hard media. Yeah. Yeah. So I started working for Denon, and Denon for all their audio components, high-end amps and receivers.
Mm-hmm. I'm familiar with them.
Well, at the time they had a music division, and they were distributing some really cool labels at the time, one of which you might know, which is Sub Pop, which is the home of Nirvana and Mudhoney. So some of the early bands that became huge. So I knew somebody. The only reason how I got there was I knew somebody from CHRW 94.7.
So you networked your way in.
I knew somebody. I saw them at a show, and they asked me what I was doing, and I said, "Well, I'm working for my dad, as you know." And they said, "Well, we're working for this cool little record label and we need some help." So I said, "Okay." Well, they said, "Come on in and meet the manager." So I did. And they said, "We could only keep you on for a month." And this is when during a recession. So it was tough to even.
Oh, geez. We're talking what, like 93-ish, 92?
93.
Yeah.
So it was tough to get a job anywhere. I was lucky just to be working for my dad.
I never thought about that there is a graduating cohort of students who get caught up in a recession.
It's timing, and you're either lucky or not. So they said, we can keep you for a month, but after that, we're not sure. Well, that turned into a year, and then I was there for about 3 years. And then from there, and I learned a ton. It was great.
So were you selling music to retail locations then?
Not at Denon. I was, they called it CSR. So I was a customer service rep. So I would go around to retail and do inventory counts of our product.
Okay.
And then I did some window displays. I had to pick up some artists from the airport. That was interesting. I had to pick up Coolio and his posse.
You got a story there?
I got a good story, yeah. So the car I had was this beige Volvo, 1984.
Oh, geez, this was before
It was a DL.
Volvos became sexy.
Yeah, it was not a sexy car. It was my first car. It was not only beige outside, it was beige inside. So so it was all beige all day. So Coolio was on Tommy Boy Records, and Tommy Boy at the time was a huge hip-hop label, and they were coming in to do a bunch of shows in the city, and they didn't have anybody to pick them up. So my boss said, hey, I need you to do me a huge favor. Can you pick up Coolio, his MC, and his DJ guy, and their manager? So I'm like, well, I've got my car. So I pulled up at the Arrivals. I think it was Terminal 1 back in the day. And there's Coolio, and he is hilarious. They all had their sunglasses on. This tall, skinny kid gets out of the car, and there's these like hip hop superstars from LA, Compton, actually. And they look at me like they just saw a ghost. And and I said, hey, I'm Zoltan from Denon, here to help Tommy Boy Records. And hey, come on, I'm going to take you guys to the show. And I got to tell you, they were a little bit weird at first, but they put all their gear in my car, and I took them to the hotel, and then they met up with their publicist. And it was like at the end of it, and of course I had to drop them off at the airport. They gave me a nice group hug, and it was awesome. It was like a really great experience, but the looks on their faces, they were expecting like some kind of a, limousine or something cool, sport utility vehicle.
Not a 4 or 5-year-old Volvo.
No. So anyway, that was pretty fun.
So from there you moved to Koch Entertainment. How did you get there, and what did you do?
So Denon's division started to change, and my boss left to start his own distribution company. And when he left, things changed. So we all started to look for new homes. There was about 3 of us that went to Koch, and Koch was the largest independent music distributor in the U.S., and they were building their presence in Canada. And the guys that ran it hired me, and I worked there for a number of years. I got a chance to work on that Prodigy record, which was huge, the Fat of the Land. I don't know if you remember that.
Is that the one that really put them on the map?
It did, and we were the little upstart, distributor, and that happened. You would be banging your head against the wall trying to, sell these releases that were so tough back during then. But along came a bluebird, as they say, and it hit us in the forehead, and we had this huge record. It sold millions, and it put them on the map. So same with their label, XL Recordings, which is a really big label now. So
from there you moved to Famous Players. A bit of a pivot, because this was probably your first time in media sales?
Yes, it was. So interesting story was I was at Koch, and my wife and I at the time were expecting our twins. She was working for Famous Players in media sales, and I had met her boss, and he had met me at a bunch of functions, like prior to, like in the past couple of years while she was working there. So long story short is that she was going on mat leave, and he took a liking to me and liked my background. And he said to Sarah, he said, well, why don't you, instead of me hiring somebody, why don't you just let your husband take my role? And I thought, no, that's where my pride came in. No, I don't need to take your job. It's fine. And then we did the numbers, and I said, well, I'll do it for a year while you come back. So I took that role as an account manager at Famous Players Media for a year, and I had such a good year that we both decided that I should just keep going. So that lasted for about 9 years.
At what point did Cineplex come in and buy Famous Players?
That was 2005.
2005. So you'd been with Famous Players for what, 4 to 5 years or so? And then Cineplex came in and things changed from there?
Famous Players Media, yeah, it was on the selling. Viacom was selling off Famous Players. They were selling off a lot of things. They sold off Canada's Wonderland. They sold off a lot of properties, and Famous Players was one of them. So Cineplex came in and bought them. You know, the number one reason they bought the exhibitor was because of the media division. And I'm not patting our own backs here, but we had such a great sales force at the time. We were doing so well that just the business, the media business of Famous Players was so massive that automatically it injected a huge opportunity for Cineplex when they bought Famous Players. So that was in 2005, and things changed pretty quickly. Cineplex, very corporate, public company. You know, the reporting, the quarterly reporting, everything changed, and that was a huge adjustment because when we started at Famous Players Media, I think it was, the division was so tiny, and this is back when they still had the carousel slides. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember the carousel slides, yeah.
It was like those old Kodak projectors that,
It was kind of the precursor to the pre-movie show that they've got now.
That's right.
It's just slides, no motion.
That's right. And the great thing about that acquisition was that along with it came a ton of resources and a really great opportunity for the new company to advance and evolve in the media world. And with that came, the full motion, the 35 millimeter was then replaced by projection, and Cineplex.com happened, and then their mobile app. Everything's all digital now, and they are a powerhouse in terms, they're really the only one-stop for in-theater advertising. But it was great. It was I learned so much about media, about business, about agencies, clients, everything. It was a really great experience. It really sort of put me where I am now.
You started as an account manager and moved up to director. You said in both roles you had to sell, but what was the difference between doing the AM role and the director role?
The account manager role was more just a day-to-day. You've got a territory and you work it and you try to get as much revenue as you can out of it. With the director, typically in most sales organizations, a director would mean you have a team under you, and then you've got quotas and you have to, hit your numbers accordingly. However, when we were back then, there wasn't much difference other than some corporate accounts. With the director responsibility, I was working on Scotiabank, Labatt, Coca-Cola, and these were big corporate accounts because Coke was pouring in the theaters. Scotiabank was the sponsorship partner. Obviously, they named theaters after Scotiabank. The Scene program happened. So the director role was really more of a corporate title, if you will. But it was still selling 100% of the time.
What made you leave Cineplex after 9 years and go out on your own and start Octopus Media?
Well, I always wanted to start my own business. And, the timing was right. I was at a certain age. And I thought if I was going to do it, I should do it now and not when I'm older. And so I had an opportunity to start an agency, and I went for it. So it was pretty quickly after I left. It was about 3 months after. I started Octopus Media with a business partner, and we had that for 4 years until I went off again and rebranded to Mellor Croy.
Did you see a gap in media buying and planning that you thought you could personally fill?
I did. I thought, I have so much respect for the big agencies and what they do, for the amount of people they employ and for the large accounts that they manage. But I did see that there was a tendency of high turnover.
You definitely had a lot of high turnover at agencies.
Lots of high turnover. We all get it. Like, we're young people at some point in time trying to make an impression in this business. And so you work at one agency and then you get offered a little bit more at another and you just keep moving. So I thought for the clients, that could be a tough situation to be in most of the time. So why not have seasoned professionals that could always be there. And that could offer, that could make quick decisions based on experience and not have that high turnover and provide good service. So it was this kind of approach, like, being nimble, being small enough that you could get a lot done and not have to, go through too many hoops. So it's really just trying to change the model for the client a little bit. That was my differentiator.
Who were some of your first clients?
Some of my first clients were West 49, which was a retailer at the time. I think they're still around.
I think they're still in a handful of malls.
But they were bought by YM Inc., which is Suzy Shear and Blue Notes. It's a big sort of discount retailer. But at the time, they were on the cutting edge of this lifestyle, apparel.
They owned skater apparel in the 90s and the early 2000s.
That's right. So they were instrumental in some of the coolest brands, O'Neill, Billabong. Their own private label of West 49 was, you saw the T-shirts and you saw the stickers everywhere.
Yeah, that did well.
So they had a really great, a great run. And that was a client of mine that I worked with initially. I also worked with Canadian Diabetes Association, HMV, which was, long history back in the music days, but I had a good rapport with them and helped them out on a number of projects. So those were some of the early clients that I worked with.
So you got retail, we've got petroleum and energy, not-for-profit. Is there a particular category that you enjoy planning and buying or working on?
Not really. What I've learned is that every client has they've got a business problem, or they need to solve an issue with their marketing dollars. And so how can we help them? Whether it's retail or not-for-profit or a B2B. I've been doing a lot of B2B lately with my existing agency, and it's been great work. I really enjoy. I've always been in the consumer side, even with in theater. It was always B2C, but working on some B2B has been great. So yeah, to answer your question, Vic, it's not. I don't really have a preference as long as we can help them with the end result.
Is there a particular campaign you're proud of?
Yeah, we worked on this Take the Test with Canadian Diabetes, and really it was to create awareness of type 2 diabetes, and it was like a risk. Are you at risk? And it literally did take 2 minutes, which is why they called Take 2 Minutes to do this. It was really not really an app, but it was a web-based browser that was really easy to use, and you could just fill it out. And we applied a lot of digital media to it, and so taking the test was considered as a conversion or an acquisition, if you will. And so we were given a lot of hurdles. So we had a budget that was scaled back 3 times, yet the end goal was still the same. They still wanted the same number of tests taken, but they kept dropping the budget. So that's a tough situation to be in. Looking back, I think I would have been a lot more, firm on, well, if you're going to drop the budget, then we'll have to adjust the
expectations have got to come down.
Exactly. However, it's going back to that whole Neil Young thing. It's like, let's see if we can do it. And we over-delivered by, I think we needed to get 120,000 tests taken, and we got 180. So that was huge. That was a really big coup for us. Not coup, but it was an accomplishment, and it's a kind of a personal thing too, because my sister is diabetic, and I've seen her kind of deal with it over, the last 30 years. So it felt good to kind of help a cause that was, a little closer to me than other campaigns.
You're an ex-sales rep. This is your first foray, or that was your first foray into media buying, planning, or agency life. You a little bit more empathetic for the clients you used to chase for money?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, understanding both sides is great, and I put myself in some of the sales rep shoes that I deal with, and yeah, I look at myself. I can see myself in those situations. Sales is something that you it's like athletes, right? Athletes, for the most part, professional athletes have, natural skill and talents. And that's great. But to be successful and to win championships, they have to work hard. And so I think sales is like that. You have to work at it. You have to always be sharpening your skills and learning and figuring out new things. So it's ongoing. I think if you stop doing that, then you are going to be just chasing people for that sale, or you got braces to pay for, and that's the only reason you're calling them. You don't want to help them. You just want to sell them something, which most of the time, 9 times out of 10, it never really works out. So I think, I definitely am fortunate that I've seen both sides, but it definitely helps me when I'm speaking with with media suppliers. I understand where they're coming from, and it's good. I get a good rapport, and I think they respect me because I did what I used to do, what they do now, and now I also understand and absolutely appreciate what agency people go through, because now I'm experiencing it. So it's been really interesting.
How did Mellor Croy come about?
So we wound down Octopus Media in 2014, and then essentially it was a rebrand to Mellor Croy. My partner and I, business partner at the time, took different directions, and then I essentially just started Mellor Croy and had partners at the time. And then 2 years ago, I solely own it now.
And how does Mellor Croy differ from Octopus Media?
Octopus Media started as a bit of a rep, like a media sales agency at first, because that's all we knew how to do. But then we started to get requests from clients like, hey, can you broker this deal? Can you help us out with this buy? We just don't have time to do it. And we started getting a lot more requests like that. So then we very quickly said, okay, well, we don't really need to rep anything. We know that we'll be an agency and we'll do buys on behalf of our clients and plans. So it sort of started as a hybrid. Mellor Croy from day one was always a buying and planning agency, and we never steered away from that.
You got to tell the story, though, about how you came up with the name Mellor Croy, because I think it's very clever.
Thanks. It's
it plays into your passions for music. It
does, yeah. I think you can beat your head against a wall all day long to try and figure out what you want to name your company, and it can be an exhausting task for sure. So I thought, well, let's just make it simple. So I kind of Frankensteined the name. I basically built it out of nothing. So Mellor is the middle name of a musician, Joe Strummer from The Clash. His middle name is Mellor. And then there's a little town north of London called Croydon. So I just took Mellor and Croydon and I chopped off the D-O-N, and there you have Mellor Croy.
Why Croydon, though? Of all the places you could have picked, why does that one stand out for you?
Well, because another member in the band is from Croydon.
Okay.
So I did some kind of...
So it all comes back to The Clash.
Yeah, it does, pretty much. Yeah, I could have just said that.
Okay, a couple of rapid-fire questions for you. Your favorite song?
So that's like an impossible question for somebody who's a music fan, but I have to say it's Kick Out the Jams by the MC5. It's just an absolute like barn burner of a song. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but
I can't say that I have.
But maybe after today's pod, you can go and check it out. It's a live recording, but it's such a powerful. It is pretty political, the nature of the song. Again, it's not anything to do with my stances, but I just love the sheer power of the song. It's everything that makes sense to me about music.
Your favorite band? Should we be surprised that they are
The Clash? Yeah, that's another tough one. I've got so many favorite bands, but that's the one that my sister first introduced me. So I've got to, it always comes back to them. But from them, there's so many others. It's really, Vic, it's really an unfair question.
Okay.
But we've known each other for a bit, so this is okay.
So is this one unfair as well? Your favorite singer?
Yeah. Again, there's so many great voices out there. I'll have to say it's Neil Young or David Bowie, either one of those two.
Best band or singer to see live?
I've seen a lot of bands over the years, but there's a recent one. There's a band out of San Francisco called the OCs, and it's fronted by a guy named John Dwyer. And he's a guy that probably no one has ever heard of, or his band. However, they've been around for probably 25 years. And if you ever see them live, he's actually his own roadie. So he tunes all his own instruments.
Wow, okay.
He's an absolute perfectionist when it comes to this, but they're just unbridled. Like, they come out and they blow your head off on stage. They're really, really great. I think they're one of the best live bands I've ever seen.
Favorite movie?
Favorite movie? It's another tough one. Yeah, I worked so long in the movie business, but I don't know. I gotta say, and this may sound pretentious. I might get ripped on later, but I did like Robert Altman films, and Nashville I thought was such a strange, crazy, one of the longest films I've ever seen. But after watching it a few times, I really understood what was going on, and I just liked his style of filmmaking.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self advice, what would you say?
Bit of a cheeky answer here, but I would say buy more tech stocks.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, right? I don't think I need to say any more than that.
Tech stocks or fake meat stocks.
There you go.
My signature closing question: if you weren't in media, what would you be doing and why?
I'd probably still be in sales, to be honest with you. I think because I really enjoyed it and I was pretty good at it. I think I'm still doing it. You know, you're still selling the clients, selling them on ideas and concepts and campaigns, right? So
Always be selling.
Yeah, pretty much. No steak knives yet, but I definitely would still be doing that for sure.
Zoltan, thanks so much. This has been great.
I really appreciate it. Thanks, Vic.
That's it for today's show. For more episodes, you can go to soundcloud.com/mediapeoplepodcast or subscribe on your favorite podcast service like Apple Podcasts or CastBox. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram @VicGenova.